Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, good morning. This is the beginning of the Delusion daylong. Yeah, so this is not a daylong spent in delusion, but a daylong looking at delusion. And what is delusion? So we've got a couple of different words, but the main word is going to be moha. And moha literally means delusion. And but delusion is nuanced, so it has different flavors. And I would say you can basically separate moha into two categories. You have avijja, which is not knowing. Yeah, and avijja has a very technical definition of not knowing the Four Noble Truths. And a less technical, more obvious definition of not knowing a lot of things, but basically not knowing in general. All of the things that we don't know that would be good to know, that is avijja, and that contributes to a lot of our suffering and a lot of our not getting out of suffering is the simple not knowing. And that falls in the category of delusion. And the other would be moha moha, because we can do that in Pali. Moha moha is delusion delusion. And that is thinking we know things, and in fact, where it's kind of inaccurate. Yeah, thinking we know how the world works, and it's not. If we really looked, it's not quite that way. Yeah, or thinking we know how we work, thinking we know how our mind works, thinking we know what this thing is. You know, we name it and we say I own it, and we apply all sorts of labels to it, and then it does. You know, like all things, it breaks or it changes or it's taken from us, yeah? And we find out that all of our pretty little labels were inaccurate, that the reality of the thing was quite different than what we thought it was. And that's delusion, yeah? So there's not knowing and there's wrong knowing. And all of these contribute to, suffering, not getting it right. You know, being in a state of not making progress, not moving towards knowledge, liberation, vision of things as they really are. Yeah. And so we have the three unwholesome roots, greed, hatred, and delusion. And greed and hatred tend to be the ones that deal with objects, tangible things, right? There's this thing in front of me, do I like it or do I not like it? Yeah, and the not liking is not that I just have an absence of liking, but I do not like it. It can be as much as I hate it, or simply I do not want it around because it is not something that I like, which we call aversion. Yeah. And so greed and hatred tend to be a lot easier to quantify because when we are in one of these states, we tend to be either interacting with the world in front of us or interacting with what we think is in front of us, right? We tend to be looking outward, yeah? Or thinking that we're looking inward, like projecting, creating ideas, and then reacting to them as though they're not our own ideas. And that would sound like delusion, but if there's greed or hatred, then it does fall in that category. But that's why delusion is often considered to be of a higher order than greed and hatred, because delusion can contribute to those two in a lot of different ways. Whereas delusion by itself is not really contributed to by greed and hatred. Another aspect of this is that greed and hatred cease before full enlightenment, yeah, to a very large degree. Because a lot of your greed and hatred deal with external objects and your relationship to the world, as the mind becomes liberated, there is less need for a relationship to the world. There is more acceptance of the world as it is and less referencing the world to figure out where happiness is. Yeah. As that process happens, the mind is dealing more with the mental reality. And so there is less need for greed and hatred. And greed and hatred become very, before non-returning, they become ephemeral. Yeah, you begin to have greed for other states of being, or greed for, just like the bliss of jhanas or meditation. Yeah, you have greed for intangible things rather than tangible things. And then eventually the sense desire and ill will completely fall away. And all that remains is just kind of the scent or the after image of greed and hatred, right? The mind is never going to invest in the world in the same way. But you still have a lot of capability for delusion. Yeah. And so it's always going to be appropriate to really chip away at delusion and look at it and try to understand it and try to figure out, most importantly, to the essence of what we're talking about in terms of the Satipatthana, know when we are deluded. Know when we are facing something that we don't know, or know when we have wrongly known something, or when we're taking something to be fact when it is not actually fact. Yeah? Catching that is hard to do. Not for others. As you walk through the world, you have plenty of people telling you you're wrong. But it's hard for us to catch ourselves in delusion. Yeah, because that's the essence of it. Half the time it's we don't know, and the essence of not knowing is that we don't know. Yeah, but the other half is that we really honestly think we're getting it. We understand things, and we're just wrong. Because, either we were taught wrong, or we're just going by the way we worked things out logically. And, the Buddha, of course, cautions us to be careful about that. Yeah, because it's suspect. The mind can be tricked. And in some ways, the mind wants to be tricked. Because if it's going to get, pleasure from being in the world, and if it's going to try to avoid the reality of suffering, it kind of needs to not see things clearly to do that. If you see things clearly, what do you see? You see the Four Noble Truths. You see the reality of suffering. You see the reality that the freedom from suffering doesn't come from the world. It comes from being liberated from the world and the need for the world. So we're talking about becoming mindful of our lack of mindfulness, becoming undeluded about our delusion. And this is the caveat I said again and again for this particular Satipatthana, the third Satipatthana, the mindfulness of the mind, is that if you apply your mindfulness to looking at what is my mind state right now, and the answer comes back, I am deluded, you're not doing it wrong, right? And this is very important, because I think in principle, if we look at our mind and we see greed, hatred, or delusion, we probably want to react. We probably want to change something because we don't want to get that assessment. And for a lot of people, that's why the Buddhism or Buddhist practice is an instant turnoff. Like, because they're told to look at their mind and it's a mess, and they say, no, wrong answer. I don't like that. I have a better opinion of myself. Let's not look. And they close the closet, they sweep things under the rug, and they go back to doing what they were doing. But mindfulness is not it's not judgmental. In essence, it is, in order to be mindful, we have to drop the judgments and just look at how things are actually. So we assess the mind, and we can look, and we're trying to figure out what mind state am I in. And when we begin this process, we may not necessarily always find greed or hatred. There might be plenty of times where we're not, filled with desire or not filled with aversion. But we're probably always going to find times when we're deluded. Yeah. Basically, when we start looking, we're going to see that there's a lot of not mindfulness happening. And when we try to be mindful, it doesn't work. It feels like there's obstacles. We keep forgetting, we keep slipping up. And so our original assessment when we look for delusion is going to be that there's a ton of it here. We don't even know where it's coming from, but it's just so hard to stay on task, to learn, to remember, to keep the precepts. And what is this all about? Yeah, well, a lot of it is just beginning the process of waking up. So we have to do what we did with greed and hatred, and we have to start creating lists and going to the thesaurus and compiling an understanding of all of the different mind states and possible mind states and conditions, paccaya, that contribute to this sense of delusion. Yeah, and this will allow us to recognize when delusion is present, and we can be mindful of the fact when delusion is present and begin to alter course gradually, much more gradually than greed and hatred. They have obvious antidotes, but the antidote to delusion is not going to be so obvious always. If we don't know, how do you correct that? Well, I have to know. But what if what you don't know is rebirth, right? The only way to answer that is to die and see if you arise somewhere else. Right? So you can't necessarily clear up that particular not knowing immediately. Yeah, but there are a lot of ways that you can grow mindful of that and aware of that. It's like, okay, yeah, no, this is the extent of my knowledge in that area. And when you get mindful of it to that degree, then it is no longer a source of confusion or despair. Yeah. You know, okay, this is the limit of my knowledge, and everything beyond that, I don't know, so I can't operate in that. And there's a lot of power to recognizing, oh, this is avijja, I don't know this, and to be able to say, I don't know. Yeah, because then you're not going to make any misinformed decisions. You know what information you're operating with, and you know if you try something and it doesn't work, well, that's fine, because I didn't know. Right? But let's pull up a list and just go through like we did with greed and hatred this is my list, because I know if I shared the list and had you all looking at it, you would immediately tune me out and you just start scrolling through the list, and it's there's a lot of stuff in here. But I just sat and brainstormed, and so just sit back and imagine we're creating a kind of web of what is delusion, yeah? And I'm going to be throwing some ideas out there, and some of them might be like, oh yeah, that's delusion too. But we're trying to, it's not just one state we're describing all of the conditions that contribute to delusion, that are a symptom of delusion, that are, just us not being not deluded. A lot of it's a kind of just having an absence of any particular goal or aspiration or direction, yeah, and seeing what that can look like in actual terms, so giving some concrete ideas of delusion, yeah. So the essence of delusion, you got three main hindrances that come about. So sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and skeptical doubt. Yeah, the first one that falls away is skeptical doubt. That falls away at stream entry. But the other two, they're going to be around for a while. Yeah, because they're much more essential. They deal with our ideas of energy and our relationship to any sort of obstacle to the mind trying to do what it wants to do. Now, the obstacles are internal. We create the obstacles, but that's the essence of delusion. Yeah, so those are the hindrances. A lot of delusion, the mind, and those hindrances kind of deal a lot with the sign of the absence of the sign of the beautiful, or the sign of the repulsive. So as we talked about with greed and hatred, you have the sign of the beautiful, which is, oh, that's nice, that's attractive, that's good. And you have the sign of the repulsive, oh, that's not nice, that's ugly, that's bad. Yeah, and these kind of orient us in terms of moving towards or away from something. But in the absence of those ideas, what do we have? Well, We don't have nothing. We have a lot of mind states that don't have a clear goal or objective. So the basic Vedana tends to be more neutral, less overtly pleasant or unpleasant. And a lot more times it tends to be more muddled and more neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Yeah. So a lot of the doubt and the basic forms of delusion are going to be addressed even to get your foot in the door of the temple or monastery or retreat center. Yeah. So the idea of silabata paramasa, or that you can absolve yourself of wrongdoing through penitence. Yeah, you can do some act that will absolve you of your wrongdoings, so that you don't actually have to correct the source of the wrongdoings. And this is this idea of silabata paramasa, rites and rituals, that you can do a ritual that will make you pure without actually having to purify your mind of the greed, hatred, and delusion. You know, that is a delusion. Another delusion is called Sakkaya Ditthi, or the belief in a tangible, permanent self. And that could be as simple as believing, oh, I have a soul. Somewhere in here, there's this fluffy, little, colorful cloud that is my soul. And when I die, it kind of floats off to some other realm and gets a new body. But it's permanent, it's tangible. Or we can think that consciousness is us. Or we can think that the body is us, and that when we die, that's it. You know, the body falls over, it becomes soil, and we're gone. Now, all of these are Sakkaya Ditthi, self-view, delusion. Then we have other, like the idea of permanence. Anywhere in the world is a delusion. Why is it a delusion? Well, it's a combination. One is, we can't actually, like impermanence is not something that we necessarily see immediately, right? Because a lot of things seem kind of stable. Yeah, objects, kind of stable. But if we watch them over time and we assess, we realize that things are always changing, yeah? So it's a mix of avijja, not knowing, but also wrong knowing, yeah? We assume that because it's stable now, it will continue to be stable. The idea that anything in the universe is permanent and stable, that it does not change, that it is always a particular way, flies in the face of everything we've experienced that eventually changes. Yeah. The idea of, well, this is in counter to dukkha, so the idea that there is to be found in the world permanent satisfaction, security, loyalty, dependability, stability, safety, that there's any way to get a lasting peace in the world, any way to have a lasting salvation or utopia kind of state in the world. Any way where out of devotion, out of desperation, we take up devotion to a particular deity or God or cause or creed, thinking that that will be the cause of our salvation. Yeah? That we don't have to work out our salvation ourselves. We just have to put completely our faith into this particular thing. That will be done out of delusion. Yeah, this is not taking responsibility. It's kind of putting the responsibility to somebody else. It's like, oh, that this God is going to set things right. I just have to make the right prostrations and devotions and put a little money in the basket. Yeah. But now let's talk about like on a day-to-day basis. What are we going to see? Maybe scatteredness, sloppiness, laziness. Yes. Typically in the commentaries, that's categorical delusion. Yeah, delusion type. But also the idea of agnosticism. You know, somebody who says, oh, who can say what's right and wrong? To be completely ambivalent to the idea of right and wrong. Again, it doesn't really, even a child knows the difference between a hero and a villain, right? If you look at the world, you can see that good deeds are applauded and bad deeds are criticized. Yeah, you can't be agnostic about karma. Yeah, but also to be agnostic about your own ability to have any effect on your world. So any like questions where like, oh, well, why do anything about this? It doesn't matter. My voice doesn't matter. Oh, this is a situation. I can't change anything about this, so why care about it? Yeah, it's this sort of like social apathy also doesn't match the fact that when we make a decision, when we do something, it tends to have an effect in the world. To a greater degree, any lack of ambition, any disassociation with the world, being inattentive, forgetful, confused, these are all symptoms of not having an object, and by virtue of that, not having a direction, just not being able to move in any direction. Just because you don't have greed or hatred at the moment, you kind of just do nothing. Also, insecurity, paranoia, and distrust. So sometimes this comes from just not knowing and being afraid of that. Sometimes it comes from wrongly knowing, thinking that so and so is, is spying on you. You've created a narrative. Although this is in delusion, it has nothing to do with the actual objects. It's all internal objects. So with a lack of ambition, sometimes we find that people get OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or the common term is like a dopamine junkie. It's just any little satisfaction becomes magnified by the fact that you're in a kind of neutral state, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So any tiny little pleasant becomes overly weighted. Yeah, and that's in the delusion category rather than the greed category. It can seem like greed, but often it's just a response, like to not having a direction. And there are a lot of companies these days that kind of prey on that with cell phones, right? There's this whole like billions of dollars poured into making the most satisfying little clicking sound when you press the button on your phone, yeah. Because there is no button, you're just tapping a screen, but to make it click and to make the little icon kind of seem to be pressed into the screen for a moment, and any way to get any tiny little bit of satisfaction and dopamine or response from your activities can be very obsession creating for the deluded mind. Anytime when we're stuck in a framework of collecting or hoarding, when our living spaces become cluttered, when our hygiene becomes really poor, we're just inattentive to our own body. Obesity can sometimes come from this, but all sorts of diseases that are kind of based in just not taking care of ourselves. Yeah. We have the typical responses of mana, which is conceit. So the I, me, mine mentality, these are delusion. Yeah? And this is in the commentaries, but it's very popular these days. The idea of conceit can be like a framework of viewing something as worse, viewing something as the same, or viewing something as better. These are all conceits in a way, yeah, because you're trying to evaluate something not seeing it as it is, but evaluate it based on something external to it, which is to kind of deny its own reality. So these are some ideas of restlessness, worry, guilt, self-doubt, depression. To a greater degree, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, the words that we use to describe what suffering is, a lot of these are responses to suffering that come from delusion. Yeah. When non-delusion is present, unpleasantness, discomfort, even pain is often treated differently. It usually doesn't involve us like collapsing and crying and being miserable, but saying like, "Oh, this is unpleasant. Oh, this is a shame. I wish it hadn't happened this way, but here we are." Non-delusion usually doesn't develop into pain, grief, and despair. Yeah, it's usually more, oh, this is the reality of the situation. And I like it's always stuck with me because it's very funny during the SN Goenka retreats. You have these 10-day retreats, and S.N. Goenka is talking about the values of mindfulness. And he's like, well, when you're mindful, you're not even afraid of death. And everybody in the room is like, is that true? Could that be true? It's like, no. When you're totally mindful, you're being mindful of the breath going in and going out, and then it stops, and you're like, oh, I'm dying. Well, let's see what this is like. Yeah, I haven't done this before. Because mindfulness is like nothing is as threatening as it is when there is not mindfulness. Yeah, when you actually know a lot of the pain and suffering and sorrow and lamentation, the despair that comes from not knowing is just not the same. Yeah? Another form of delusion, speculative views, daydreaming, fantasizing, reminiscing about the past, fantasizing about the future. Yeah. Anytime when we fall into habits, just to have a habit, when we go to a restaurant and we always order the usual. I'm guilty of that, but it's what is that process that causes us to kind of settle into a crevice like water and the path of least resistance? Yeah, it's often delusion. The couch potato or low energy states is, again, just delusion that brings that about. Drugs and alcohol dependency, these are centered in delusion and they contribute to delusion. Right? This is why the fifth precept is what it is. Yeah, these things compound delusion because they compound the not knowing. They compound the lack of responsibility for our actions. Yeah, they drop our ability to have inhibition. And they give us states which are unnatural. They create states. Yeah, and it's kind of counter to mindfulness, where you're sitting down and you're saying, well, I want to have pleasure right now. Yeah, because right now I'm feeling unpleasant states. I'd much rather feel pleasant states. Let's change it. Yeah, it's kind of, it can work in the short term, but you always get resultant from that. Yeah, and that's what the resultant is usually more delusion. There's usually more dependency on that. It's like, oh, well, I got to do that thing again to get the pleasant. Because, again, you're in resistance to the nature of the world. Selfishness and self-centeredness. There's so many ways to conceive of that. But many of the ways it comes about is through delusion, and a lot of the ways it can come about is also through having a lack of empathy, which in terms of wrong intention. So this is the intention or the factor of the Eightfold Path. We have cruelty, and this comes from delusion. It's not the same as ill will or wanting harm. It's being uncaring or apathetic to the pain and suffering of others. It allows all sorts of misdeeds to be done, not through actually wanting to cause pain, but just not caring that something caused pain. And that's in the delusion category. Yeah. And manipulation can sometimes be like that. You're not viewing the person as they are, or viewing them appropriately. You're not empathetic to them. Then you can just have them do things as though they are an object or a machine. Yeah. And a lot of delusion in terms of people's relationship to other beings, like animals. Delusion really gets shown when they're like, oh, it doesn't feel pain, it doesn't have a soul. It's like, why are you calling it an it? It's a living being just like you. Well, delusion is the answer to that. And I'm not a psychologist, but there are plenty of icks, so psychotic, sociopathic, schizophrenic, all sorts of mental diseases are going to be various kinds of delusion and responses to the world coming from delusion. And in the Thai language, their idiom for somebody who is crazy is actually mai mi sati. They don't have mindfulness. Yeah, it's one and the same. And I think that's very interesting in terms of talking about mental disease, is in the same way that suffering is handled differently by non-delusion versus the deluded mind. All of the stuff that goes on in our mind is handled differently as well. In a lot of ways, there is still those patterns when we have mindfulness, yeah? But it is said that the stream enterer cannot go insane. Yeah, and now why is that? Because at stream entry, there becomes imbued a certain measure of mindfulness that does not go away. Yeah, and that is that mindfulness which is responsible for not breaking the precepts and being capable of continuing to see the Four Noble Truths. That becomes rooted in the mind. The ignorance, the avijja that contributed to not seeing that goes away. And so to some degree, and that's not to say that stream enterers can't do all sorts of things. They can be delirious with pain. They can be confused. They can, they can, they can have Alzheimer's. They can lose their memory. They can just not know what's going on. All sorts of things are possible to them, but their response to it is not going to be a complete belief in what's going on. And that's often how you quantify somebody who's crazy, right? The clinical definition is they don't know the difference between right and wrong. You know, that is, stream enterer has finally resolved that. You know, they've established a mindfulness, a steady mindfulness as to what's right and wrong. They could be confused as to what's going on and follow a course of action that will cause harm, not knowing that it will cause harm, but they will not intentionally cause harm. Yeah, and so they cannot intentionally believe the world to the same degree that a crazy person sees somebody walk in the room. They believe somebody has walked in the room, even if they're not really there. Right? Because there's the mindfulness that would say, like, is that really happening? It isn't there. And the moment when somebody starts, realizing, I have this thing that I do, and I'm not really in control of it, but when it happens, it makes me suffer. That's a person who's already on the road to recovering, if not getting better from their condition, at least being able to live with their condition, yeah, which is the greater part of the problem, right, of delusion, is when it makes life unlivable. And that's actually, if you think about it, that's why you came to the practice. Yeah, it wasn't possible to just live your life and not suffer. Why? Well, greed, hatred, and delusion. But you realize that eventually you have to get rid of those to be able to just live and not suffer. Yeah. And so, I've thrown out some ideas here, but you might be able to expand on the list. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just some ideas of what, when you're assessing the mind, you're trying to be mindful, like, what state of mind am I in? You have 6 options: greed, hatred, delusion, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And it's not that these are the only possible states of existence in the entire infinite universe. No. But the ways that our minds work right now, here in samsara, in this little corner of samsara, those are the options. Yeah? Yeah, so it doesn't have to be that complicated. Yeah, you figure out, are some of these patterns present? Yeah, maybe there's a murkiness in the mind, lack of enthusiasm, lack of direction, kind of confusion about what to do next. Yeah, you're like, oh, where's that coming from? Maybe this could be some aspect of delusion. If you were to investigate, you would see that probably mindfulness has slipped. Yeah, but then you catching it is the beginning of the solution, right? Like, oh, it's because I just haven't been paying attention to anything. I've just been kind of on autopilot. Maybe if I start to do something intentionally and sit down and kind of focus for a bit, that feeling will dissipate. Now, it doesn't happen instantaneously because we don't control our minds to that degree. Our minds are still not self, they're still conditioned phenomena. But we can start changing some of the conditions, yeah? Delusion maintains itself based on having a lot of supportive conditions. When we start injecting mindfulness and intention and looking at things, observing things as they are, rather than observing our labels or assumptions about them, then we are adding the conditions that will chip away at delusion. Yeah. But what is it when we get to the state of non-delusion? And that's the interesting transition. The same as with greed and hatred, when we get into a state of non-greed or non-hatred, it's usually quite invisible to us. Yeah. One teacher, Ajahn Amaro, would say, if it's not too hard to know if delusion is present. Are you suffering? Well, then, yeah, delusion is present. And it can really be that simple. You're assessing the mind as like, oh, this is awful. I'm feeling sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Well, then there's delusion present. Yeah. But you look at the mind, it's like, well, not really. No, I feel kind of nice and present and in the moment, and I'm not there. There isn't sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Well, it can be as simple as, well, maybe this is a not deluded state. Don't pat yourself on the back too quickly. It's like, because remember that ego is often here in the delusion category. It can be easy to just like, oh, I'm not deluded. Hey, I'm not deluded. I'm not deluded. That's probably the beginning of being back in the deluded state. But these moments of non-delusion do occur, and they often occur at times when we drop some of our narrative, when we drop some of our labels, when we are in a state of paying attention. And this is why we talk about enlightenment, and we talk about hearing the Dhamma as the main cause for enlightenment. It's because when we hear the Dhamma and we listen to it, at that moment we're paying attention. Where we often give it our whole attention because it deals with things that are relevant to us. Yeah, and that moment of attention can be the simple seed for non-delusion. Yeah? So when we have given our full attention to something, we have set a condition for enlightenment. Yeah, it's not necessarily going to happen. A lot of people even sat in front of the Buddha as he was giving a sermon, and at the end of the sermon, it's like, oh, Bhante, that was such a great sermon. Oh, thank you. I can't wait for the next one. They didn't get it. Yeah, it's entirely possible. The Buddha says, the fool can live in the proximity of a wise person their entire life and still not become wise. Yeah, but conversely, a wise person can be in the presence of a wise person for just a moment, and that can be a cause for them to understand. Yeah, the difference is, can we catch our states of delusion so that we don't compound them? In doing so, we will clear the way for some states of non-delusion. And the more that those are present, the more likely we are to begin to get wise. More likely we are to begin to clear up some of our not knowing and to develop, knowing. Or if it's something that we can't know, we at least know the extent of our knowledge. And to a lot of degree, that gives us something to work with. All right, so now we can take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and do sitting and walking on the half hours, your choice. It's a nice summer day, many parts of the world today. So if you would not want to be sitting in front of your computer in a slightly dark room, you would rather be out meditating somewhere, don't worry, just turn off your camera and go to it. But if you are in your little room and you turn on your video, other people can see you, and that could be a cause for them to keep going, keep practicing, being reminded that there's Sangha, there's other people doing this, that there are results to be gotten, and we're all getting there little by little, one step at a time, one moment of non-delusion at a time. Yeah, so we'll do this until noon Eastern time. Yeah, so it's another 2 hours, I guess. So sitting, walking, and this is, yeah, maybe it's a bit much. Yeah, but it's planting some seeds, like things to look for, things to consider. Yeah, and when you catch delusion, remember delusion is not permanent. Nothing is permanent. Yeah, so when you do notice delusion, it's okay to be able to say, okay, this is delusion. I'm deluded. Yeah, it's just you're good. You're being mindful. You pay attention to it. Look for the conditions. Try to figure out the causes. Try to figure out how it's relating to other things. Try to see if it's increasing in strength, or if it's not, then you're probably okay. Just keep being mindful. It'll decrease in strength. Yeah, and yeah, see where that gets us. See what we come up with. Yeah, we'll be able to check in the afternoon and see. What did we see? What did our mindfulness of delusion reveal to us? Yeah.